Tens of thousands of people doing dangerous work to protect you are gravely ill. Some are dying. They've helped create the most destructive weapons in the world, but now they fight radiation exposure. Tonight, in nuclear fallout, their families fight to pay medical bills through a program that costs taxpayers billions of dollars. 38 years old, dependent on oxygen, a lifeline snarling through his house.
It's very hard, you know. Sometimes I feel worthless.
A Navy vet who took his last breath at the age of 44.
I lost my whole life.
A New Mexico rancher, half of his body weight lost before losing his life.
I'm here to tell you it affected somebody dear to me, and I'm mad about it.
The government calls them the men and women who sacrifice so much for our country's national security, workers exposed to radiation while working around nuclear weapons. InvestigateTV and our partners at ProPublica and the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper uncovered allegations of lax safety oversight, workers struggling with cancer but also struggling with a federal program designed to help them cover some of those bills. And we found that same program is costing taxpayers billions more than ever anticipated.
We do enough to develop nuclear weapons, but we don't do enough to protect those workers that produce them and maintain them and defend this country.
August 1999, the Los Alamos National Laboratory in rural New Mexico hired Gilbert Mondragon. The lab, built during World War II, is part of the Manhattan Project.
At 10:58, the morning of August 9th, the bomb was exploded above the city.
The birthplace of the U.S. nuclear weapons program. It produced the nation's first atomic bomb.
You did all the dirty work.
Yeah, dirty work.
Mondragon started as a laborer and received a promotion to technician. He says his job included radiation monitoring and looking for contamination.
Do you think you were contaminated a lot?
I know I was.
How often?
I'd say on at least a weekly basis.
As a precaution, many Los Alamos employees wear a badge like this to measure radiation. Federal law limits the amount of exposure employees can have to radiation and requires facilities to keep track. InvestigateTV reviewed Mondragon's badge records and found it registered a zero, no radiation exposure, for 14 years.
But it's no surprise to you that your badge didn't read much.
No.
Mondragon says supervisors instructed him to remove or hide his badge.
The badge that is supposed to be measuring contamination, you would take off before you went into the place that was contaminated.
Yes.
And you were instructed to do that.
Instructed.
Doctors diagnosed Mondragon with kidney cancer. He beat it.
My medical oxygen concentrator that I have at home.
But now battles lung disease.
I have my thing for my nebulizer treatment.
He's tied to an oxygen tank.
It sucks. I'm 38 years old and I'm worse than an 80-year-old man.
The constant and costly medical bills are overwhelming.
I'll be on a payment plan, it seems like, for the rest of my life.
They're like our military. They performed. They didn't ask questions. They're patriotic.
Former Secretary of Energy Bill Richardson helped launch a program to compensate some of these workers. But the government predictions of who would qualify turned out to be low, very low. In the early 2000s, the government estimated a compensation program would pay more than 3,000 workers throughout the Energy Department's nuclear weapons complexes and would cost around $1.5 billion. Instead, so far, the program has paid 61,000 workers and their families $15.5 billion.
This problem is ongoing. It's at every nuclear facility.
Workers at nuclear facilities from Tennessee to South Carolina, New Mexico to Washington continue to die from cancer. But many of these families receive no money.
I would say there's 500,000 out there that deserve compensation. And if it's going to cost the government money, so be it.
Tens of thousands of workers battling illness are getting rejected for claims. One reason why, the way the federal program is structured. For example, at Los Alamos, workers who started in 1995 or earlier have a relatively easy time getting compensated if they have one of 22 cancers. But if they started after 1995, it's tougher to get money. That's because after 1995, the Department of Energy got new authority to financially penalize nuclear facilities for violating safety standards. So federal officials initially assumed exposure would be reduced and record keeping would improve. Some experts say they're wrong.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. In other words, after 1995, there's still a problem. The government then, it was the Congress, they wanted to save some money. They wanted to not make this an entitlement forever. That was their objective. They weren't evil. It was just bad economics, and it was unfair to a lot of workers. So it needs to be updated.
I don't know how they determine, okay, we'll just cut it off at this year.
Angela Waldy will likely be paying bills the rest of her life.
The disease has formed another tumor, and it's affecting me just a little bit. It's affecting our whole family.
Waldy and her husband, Chad, recorded this video months before his death. Brain cancer took his life at the age of 44.
Watching him fade away from this big, strong man to someone that couldn't, at the end, change himself or talk or move. And that was hard. I'm still getting over that. I can't. It's in my head every day.
Waldy says her husband had no history of cancer in his family. They asked the government for help.
They basically told us that we needed to prove that Chad got cancer from Los Alamos. So I don't know how to prove that.
Because Chad Waldy started at Los Alamos in 1999 and not 1995, he had a difficult time proving he deserved compensation.
We didn't even want the money. We wanted just help with medical, but
And you didn't get any?
no.
Workers hired after 1995 must prove the nuclear plant caused the cancer, but getting access to records can be difficult.
Basically, it's like you come to me saying, I want a house bill. And I say, okay, fine. You go buy the lumber and the nails, and here's a hammer. That's kind of what they do.
Andrew Vaskovich is a security guard at Los Alamos. He spent 6 years creating a petition that ultimately allowed workers who started prior to 1996 to have an easier time receiving compensation. Vaskovich has petitioned to extend the date 10 years. The CDC recently rejected his request, saying there are enough reliable records for the government lab to accurately determine whether workers' illnesses were more likely than not caused by exposure at work.
What we've done is we've gone back, we looked at the bioassay data on the people who were monitored and said, even the people who were monitored had very low exposures. And so unless they somehow selectively knew who was going to be more heavily exposed and excluded those people, it seems like this is just an accident that should just come out in the wash, essentially.
The Secretary of Health and Human Services will have the final say for those workers. The Department of Labor here in D.C. administers the claims program. We requested an on-camera interview. Our email spanned 30 days. They told us an interview would need a few levels of approval. Then about a month ago, they denied our request. When we asked why, they never responded. While thousands get denied, questions remain about the safety at these nuclear facilities. InvestigateTV analyzed violation records from the Department of Energy and found long-standing issues at facilities, including Los Alamos. The significance of those findings and penalties highlighted in government reports in phrases like inability to sustain corrective action and Band-Aid solutions. Our investigation has found repeated instances of unexpected incidents at Los Alamos where workers were contaminated with radiation or inhaled chemical vapors. Analysis by our partners at the New Mexican found over the past 20 years more than 170 instances. The Department of Energy has also repeatedly cited the lab.
The contractors to DOE that run the sites, they self-report. So there's problems with that as well. I mean, you know, how many times does somebody give themselves a speeding ticket? You know, oh, I was speeding and you need to write me a ticket. It doesn't happen. It's the same thing with them.
One doctor says even with ongoing complaints, recent patients that he believes deserve money see nothing.
That is the cause of my frustration, is that the law is really designed to protect the average worker. But in real world, the opposite happens. The worker really gets screwed in the whole process.
New Mexico is sandwiched between Mississippi and Alabama as one of the poorest states in our country.
Look, if this was in New York City, you'd know that you'd have a big problem on your hands. This is in, you know, rural New Mexico where things are very different.
The lure of a high-paying job brings these workers to Los Alamos. Some can earn a six-figure salary. Dr. Akshay Sood says most of the workers he treats are low-level employees.
So most of these people had very little idea about what they were being exposed to.
So they really don't know what they're exposed to.
Most people have no clue.
It's the end result of that.
Charlene Mays' husband spent 15 years working at Los Alamos.
Did he know what he was signing up for?
That's a good question. Maybe he didn't know how dirty it was.
Cancer shrunk Gilbert Ulibarri's size 120 pounds.
I just miss him. I just miss him. And I wish he was standing here.
There's no doubt in your mind that that facility is causing cancer.
Well, if there were just one or two people, I guess we could say maybe not. But there's hundreds and maybe even thousands.
Mays watches this video. A relative made it shortly after her husband's death. A tribute, one of the many men and women called heroes. Years lost, tears shed, families torn apart.
These men made a sacrifice in a way for their country, right?
I'm going to tell you, they did.
And is their country turning their back on them?
It's almost as if we don't say it, it didn't happen. But the odds are stacked. There's so much of it. So much of it.
Los Alamos is managed and operated through a contract with the University of California, Texas A&M, and Battelle Memorial Institute. That's a nonprofit in Ohio. The lab refused our request for an on-camera interview, but did send us a statement. In part, it says it would never allow, endorse, or recommend removing radiation monitoring badges to avoid contamination. The statement went on to say the lab's nuclear operations are safe.